Right, and we're rolling. Hey guys, Mr. Myers here. We're going to be running through a quick little reading strategies mini lesson. Now, I have a poster, little visual aid. You will see this hung up in my classroom pretty soon here. And these are primary reading strategies that you guys can use whenever you're trying to interpret a text, when you're trying to read a little bit closer. If you've got a reading assignment and something has happened and you don't quite understand, you follow this process. First, question. Ask and answer questions about the text itself. You can pause and ask out loud, what is this character's motivation? Why is this character doing that? Why did he say that? Why did she behave this way? Why didn't she say that? Why didn't she do that? Any general questions that you can do to help kind of guide the process and help you find out more about characters and their motivations will help you understand the text better. Next one is a big important one. Reread. Reread any sections that confused you to find details that you may have missed. This happens to me all the time when I'm reading a book. Is that like I'll read a paragraph and then as I go on I'll be like, what did I just read? And sometimes you just got to go back and reread something. Or if you've read something and you didn't quite understand it, go back. Read it again a little slower. And hopefully you'll be able, using context, using a little more level 10 focus, as I like to say, you'll be able to kind of zero in on what the meaning of the text is and where it goes. Next, retell. Summarize what happened in the story in your own words. You can do this out loud. All right, you can stop, and as you've just finished a chapter, just finished a page or a paragraph or a section, just go, okay, so the main character did this, and this character reacted in this way to that. We'll go through into, these are general expressions. We're going to go into a very specific example in our activity here in a moment. And finally, we predict. We take what we have learned about the text through questioning, rereading, and retelling. We use it to predict what might happen next in the story. In a way, a lot of us, as we are readers, are behaving almost as detectives, which led me to the activity that we've created today. Ever heard of a whodunit? What we're going to do, and I've got handouts for each of you. It's going to be a PDF because this is an electronic format. I know it's not ideal. But anyway, we're going to read through this together. So go ahead and pull up The Intruder, which is the packet that I just attached to this. We're going to read through this mystery together. By the time that we have completed reading, and it's just a few pages, at the conclusion of the story, you should know who the murderer is. It's a quick little murder mystery. And however, when we're done reading through the first part of it, it's not going to be immediately clear to many of you who actually is the perpetrator. And so what we're going to do is we're going to read through this, and then we're going to use the strategies that we outlined just now, our reading strategies and comprehension, and put them to use so that we can become better detectives together. So, without further ado, let us begin reading The Intruder. You can read along with me in the packet. Sigmund Hudgens had been murdered in his lounge, killed by a single knife thrust to the neck. He was found in his usual armchair. This faced the fire and sat in front of a pair of tall French windows which offered a doorway out onto a pleasant-looking patio, or at least they had until they were painted shut. The garden beyond was a little unkempt, October leaves scattered across it. The room showed no signs of disturbance or struggle. Nothing had been stolen, as far as the family could tell. The murder weapon, of a common style used in leather and craft work, had been left in the wound and offered no useful leads. Inspector Parnacki looked out at the grounds thoughtfully. Hudgens had been ill for a decade or more, and cantankerous with it. His wife, Delpha, had committed suicide 4 years previously, and the case notes implied that her husband's ire had been a major contributor to her despair. Hearing footsteps, Parnacki turned around. Officer Sullivan entered the room. "The family are ready for you, Inspector," he said. "Thank you, John." Parnacki followed Sullivan back through the house to the small reception room that had been set aside for the initial interviews. He took out his notepad. "Would you bring in the nurse first?" Laura Ball was in her 30s. She appeared pleasant in an institutional sort of way, and was tidily dressed in a mix of blue and white cottons. "I've been full-time here for 7 years," she explained. "Mr. H's attacks were quite frequent. I was with him about 50% of the time, and lived in a small suite in the old servants' quarters. His family were never close, so after poor Mrs. H died, I probably talked with him more than anyone else. He was difficult, yes, but really he was just sad, and in terrible pain. I was out visiting the pharmacy when it happened. By the time I got back, the police were here. I gather Scott found his father and then called them. I wish I could tell you more." Jeff Hudgens was the victim's elder son. Sharply dressed with a slightly predatory air, he seemed more annoyed than saddened by his loss. "I took over for Father about almost 11 years ago, when he first became unwell. I like to think that the firm has prospered in that time. We weren't exactly close, no. He was always an angry man, and I was relieved to reach adulthood. I did my duty, though, and visited every weekend without fail. That's more than Scott or Barbie can claim. I was here yesterday morning and spent a couple hours with him, for all the good it did either of us. Miss Ball had gone out by the time I'd left. I went straight to my club for a stiff scotch and soda, and from there to home." Hudgens' daughter, Barbara Rogers, was between her brothers in age. Although she looked fit and tanned, her face was strongly marked with lines of old pain. "My husband Delroy and I were hiking with our boys all yesterday," she said with a defiant air. "We made our way up through the Penton Woods to the top of Hangman's Mount and had a picnic there. It was very pleasant. I'm sad that the boys have lost their grandfather, I suppose. But I hope Mother can rest a little more easily now." "Distressed? Lord, forgive me, no, of course I'm not distressed. He was a horrible father, particularly for a shy girl. I won't miss him." Scott Hudgens, the youngest son, was 37. Tidy and crisp, he seemed subdued. "I found him." "Yes," he said. "Terrible thing. I arrived about 2. I try to come by on Saturdays whenever I can. Jeff was already gone and Miss Ball was out, so I let myself in. I thought he'd be dozing. Father was an old terror, but it was horrible to see him like that. I should have realized something was wrong when I pulled up in the drive and saw the lounge windows open. Father hated draughts. I'm afraid I closed them without thinking. And then when I called for help, and then waited for your people to arrive, I wouldn't say I'm sad exactly, but for better or for worse, he was a central force in all of our lives, and it'll be odd to not have him here as a focus." Once the interviews were done, Parnacki, our detective, closed his notepad and nodded briskly to Officer Sullivan. "Let's get the killer down to the station, shall we?" Whom does Parnacki suspect, and why? So you might not know it, but we just read through the entire story, and it should be completely obvious who the murderer is. And so what I'm going to do is give you guys a chance to reread the story right now, which is one of our strategies. We're going to ask questions about the text first, then we're going to reread it. We're going to retell the story as we saw it, and then we're going to predict what will happen next, meaning who is the murderer. And so let's ask questions first. First question that a detective should ask is, well, who are our suspects, right? And we don't get any immediate information directly from the crime scene. There's a little bit of a picture from it, and you can kind of see what's going on. It's right behind the lounge doors that he had mentioned. But we talked to the nurse, Laura Ball. she said that we can ask questions like, what's her motivation? She said, well, she was the only person who really talked with him. She was the only one who was close. He didn't appear to be very close with his family at all. And then at the end, she was out visiting the pharmacy when it had happened. When she came back, he was dead, according to her testimony. We asked about Jeff, the oldest son. Jeff, who said that he didn't like his father very much either, but they weren't exactly close, but he said he did his duty by coming to visit regularly, and he was there yesterday morning. We spent a couple hours with him, and then he died. And when he had come back, he had realized that his father was dead, so he went home for a stiff scotch and soda. And then Hudgens' daughter, Barbara, who they called Barbie, said her husband, Delroy, where they were hiking with their family all day yesterday when it happened. They made their way up to the top of this mountain, and they had a picnic. And she said that, I suppose I'm very sad that the boys have lost their grandfather, I suppose, but I hope Mother can rest a little more easily now. And she said, am I distressed? Of course I'm not distressed. He was a horrible father. I won't miss him. And so we can ask questions like, well, her relationship with her father was clearly a pretty strained one. And so you might consider that as a maybe. Is it a motivation? Scott Hudgens, he was the youngest son. He said he was 37, and he said he was the one who found him. He arrived about 2. He tries to come on Saturdays. The nurse, Miss Ball, was out, which aligns, we can say, with her. This is part of rereading, is looking through and seeing if characters' testimonies line up logically with one another. The nurse was gone. And so Scott comes back. He says that he saw his father lying there, and the knife was already in his neck. And he had pulled up to the drive, saw the lounge windows open, and he knew that his father hated a draft, and so he closed them without thinking, and then he called for help. And he said he wouldn't say that he was sad either, because he didn't have a very good relationship with his father either. He says, but for better or for worse, he was a central force in all our lives. It'll be odd not to have him there as a focus. And so now that we've asked questions, all right, who are our suspects? What are their motivations? What are their relationships? We kind of already did this last part here, is that we retell. Do the testimonies line up? We retell the story, we summarize it in our own words. And then finally, we make a prediction about the text. Now, I'm going to give you guys a few more minutes, because I want you guys to have a good guess. It is one of those people that we just discussed was the murderer, and it actually should be clear. I will give you one hint. Reread. It's not a very good hint, is it? Reread, and you will find it is one detail that completely gives them away. So go ahead and pause the video, reread the entire story, look for the details, and you'll be able to find out who the murderer is. We'll come back here in a moment. All right. Well, if you've paused the video and given it your best shot to try and guess, I'm going to reveal the answer now. The answer to the intruder. The French windows in the lounge had been painted shut. We learned that in the very first paragraph. They'd been painted shut. If they'd been opened recently, the paint sealing them would have been cracked away. And there was no notice, because as it is intact, we know that Scott was lying, and he was trying to imply that the killer was someone who did not have easy access to the victim. Faced with the error in his account, Scott confessed and became openly gleeful at having found, finally, the nerve to take revenge for his mother's death. So, I hope that you guys, this is just sort of a fun activity to introduce you to the concepts of these different reading strategies. Always remember that when you're confused with a text, ask questions. Reread the text to check the details that you might have missed. Retell the story in your own words, and then make predictions about what happens next. This was our Reading Strategies mini lessons. I hope that you enjoyed it.